Fanboy, 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 fanboy. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Fanboy Reviews, and today we're gonna count down the top 10 worst, crappiest, most pathetic, most terrible Nintendo exclusives of all time. So, let's begin. Number 1. Superman 64. That's right, came out in 1999 for the Nintendo 64. This is considered one of the worst games of all time for any systems. It basically is an N64 exclusive, and the controls was absolutely horrendous. Very broken gameplay. There was really nothing to do in this game. Completely, it was aimless. All you were doing was you're Superman, but you're flying around in this poorly rendered, crappy city of Metropolis, which didn't even really look like Metropolis, and the graphics were so ugly looking. All you can really do is blame Titus, the developer. Titus is notorious for putting out some of the worst video games in the world, and unfortunately for the N64, it got a really crappy game that is Superman. It's actually just called Superman, but most fans call it Superman 64 in reference to the the end of the N64's name, rather. Also, there was supposed to be a PlayStation 1 version, but because of the crappiness of the N64 and just the overwhelming negative reception, it was eventually cancelled. And it was rumored that that version was, at least it looked a little bit better than the N64 version, so who knows if that was going to be a better copy, but there's no doubt about it. Superman 64 for the N64, absolute garbage. Number 2, Pokemon. That's right, Pokemon is an RPG franchise that's been around since, the first original generation was Red and Green, which would eventually be called Red and Blue when it reached the West. These games came out in 1996 in Japan, and basically they're really crappy, like, freaking RPG role-playing games that all you did was essentially you pit animals, wild creatures, against each other. So it's kind of like cockfighting. And, talk about cruelty. All it did was spread animal cruelty, and it treated these little Pokemon creatures with complete inhumane, very violent. I can't believe they released this game. It was basically promoting animal abuse, animal cruelty. I can't believe that Nintendo would sink this low to put out this horrible franchise, this complete pathetic series of games, and it's still coming out today. They still put out these Pokemon games for the new systems, the handheld. It's mainly become a handheld set of games, and everybody knows that nobody plays handheld games, nobody buys it. DS sucked, Game Boy sucked, and 3DS stinks. So easily one of the worst franchises. All it did was basically turn people into zombies. You got these sad little nerds, especially back in the 90s at the height of the popularity of Pokemon. It produced a really crappy TV show, horrible movies, and this really lame, corny trading card series that was basically just a Magic the Gathering ripoff. And honestly, like, the games themselves aren't good either. They completely suck. They're basically just a ripoff of, if you guys have heard of this game called Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest originally came out for the Nintendo series, and for example, like in Dragon Quest V, you can fight wild creatures, like, animals, non-human characters, but then you can also keep them in your party, keep them as part of your team after defeating them. So, and then you can level them up and so on and so forth. So this idea of gathering creatures and collecting them is not new. Pokemon ripped it off from Dragon Quest. Alright. Number 3. The Kirby series. That's right, the Kirby series is easily one of the crappiest, most pathetic, terrible games It's usually a series of platforming games, the main series anyway. Originally started out in 1992, Kirby's Dream Land for the Game Boy. Eventually releasing for the NES as well, Super Nintendo, Kirby's Dream Land 2, Kirby's Dream Land 3, Kirby Superstar, and all these other games. Horrible games. Essentially, you basically have this pink puffball character. You don't even know what the heck he's supposed to be, but he's opening up his mouth. It's its mouth, because you don't know the gender. Rather, it's not a he, it's not a she, it's an it, and it's swallowing enemies. So that's already kind of creepy. But essentially, it's just basically a ripoff of Pac-Man, except instead of yellow, it's pink. It's a freaking pink character. So Nintendo, very unoriginal, completely, just ripping off another game series. Pac-Man is by Namco, by the way. Namco is one of the most... You'll see in this list, Namco is a developer that Nintendo has stolen a lot from, and you'll see in this list. So, all the way from the original Kirby's Dream Land, all the way to, now, 2012, Kirby's Dream Collection for the Wii. Horrible games. I would not advise anybody to buy it for the kids. Terrible. They're very violent. All he does... It's basically promoting cannibalism. Yeah, cannibals. It's so gross. It's like eating other creatures. This little freaking freak. And it's promoting obesity. Because all you do is you're a character and you eat, and he's like basically gobbling up all these enemies. He's not even really like stomping them or punching them out. He's eating them. It's just crazy. And you wonder why, there's so much obesity in this world. Number 4, the Donkey Kong series. Oh man, Donkey Kong games are so crappy. Let me tell you, these games are so bad, Nintendo has to rip off its own series. So essentially the Donkey Kong games are just a rip-off of the Mario series. It's a platforming, straightforward, very one-dimensional platforming set of games. That's all it is. You're going from left to right, and you're jumping over enemies and jumping over obstacles and platforms. Definitely the worst one in the series would have to be Donkey Kong Country 2, garbage game, Diddy's Conquest, the subtitle, came out in 1995 as a sequel to the really crappy and one of the most overrated games of all time, Donkey Kong Country 1. I mean, you talk about games like Donkey Kong 64, these games are terrible, just garbage. The Game Boy had its spin-offs, Donkey Kong Land series, completely terrible set of games. Definitely not worth buying. Yeah, just garbage, Donkey Konga and stuff like that. Ugh. Number 5, Star Fox. The Star Fox series. Oh man, where do I begin? I mean, first of all, the first Star Fox came out in 1993 for the Super Nintendo. It was also called Star Wing, and essentially it's just a ripoff of Starblade, which was an arcade rail shooter from 1991 created by Namco. Here you have another game by Namco being ripped off by Nintendo, so obviously the complete lack of originality by Nintendo was evident here, very obvious. I mean, they ripped off everything, the whole polygonal 3D look, the gameplay, the shooting in the middle of space. I mean, oh my goodness, you have to see these games back to back, next to each other in action. If you have a PlayStation 2, go pick up a copy of Tekken 5. On that disc is Starblade. So you can find Starblade in Tekken 5 for the PlayStation 2, and it's one of these bonus games that's available, and you can definitely see it. So Star Fox completely sucks, garbage, terrible. The graphics aren't even that good. They look like crap, especially for the Super Nintendo. Horrible set of games. I'm sure it's still around. It went all the way to the N64, Star Fox 64, the GameCube, Star Fox Assault, and all these other games. Terrible games. Number 6, Star Tropics. Oh man, Star Tropics. This one came out in 1990 for the NES, original Nintendo. Just a bad, crappy. It's kind of like an action/adventure game. You know, basically just a rip-off of Zelda. The Zelda series. That's right, all they did was rip off Zelda. But it's like set in kind of a more modern times, you know? And the main character is Mike Jones, and it's just, you have these corny gimmicks like you gotta take this piece of paper from the manual and dip it in water to see some sort of code or a password or something. Horrible gimmick, very unoriginal, very uncreative. It didn't sell well, you know, it didn't sell a lot of copies. Definitely a failure. And that clearly evident by the sequel that came out in 1994 called Zoda's Revenge, Star Tropics 2. This was also the second last official NES game, and nobody bought it because the first one was so terrible that it was like, what's the point of buying the sequel? Number 7. The Mario series. That's right, the Mario franchise is so terrible, but I'm talking mostly about the main series, the main platforming series of games. 1985, the Super Mario Brothers came out, the first one for the NES, and all the way to now. I mean, you got this year for the Wii U, New Super Mario Bros. U. Terrible, horrendous game. Got nothing but low scores. Nobody likes these platformers anymore. You know, it's not 1982 anymore. Nobody plays platforming games. Nobody cares about 2D games. Mario stinks, and he's a freaking fat Italian plumber, and it just doesn't make any sense. You know, he's freaking using mushrooms to get higher and to get stronger, but that doesn't even make any sense because mushrooms are poisonous. So, and then he's always rescuing the same stupid girl, Princess Peach, who is just probably the dumbest, biggest damsel in distress character, and all you have to do is save her in every stupid game, every time. And it's very repetitive, the same thing, over and over and over again. I can't even believe it's still around. You know, it's amazing, actually, how many sheep that Nintendo has tricked over the years to play the same crappy game over and over again. There's nothing good about Mario. It stinks. Number 8. The Metroid series. Ugh, the Metroid series. Talk about the crappiest shooter in the world, man. I mean, the worst game out of all these is hands down Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo. It came out in 1994. One of the worst. I guess it was sort of a shooter slash platformer, but it was basically just a Mega Man ripoff. You know, stole ideas from Mega Man, stole ideas from Contra, and it's completely unoriginal. The only thing is that it's got a female character. You know, it's a female heroine instead of a male character, and that was just a gimmick. You know, it's a stupid gimmick, and it's very misogynist. It's very offensive to women, because when you defeat this game, these games, at the very end, you get to see Samus, the main character, in a bikini. And that's like the gimmick, is, oh my god, ooh, look at her, look at this girl in a bikini. That's very misogynistic, very sexist, that they have to exploit Samus's body in these games. If I was a woman, I would be so offended by this pathetic Nintendo tripe that nobody will ever hear the end of it. Horrible for women's rights, horrible for female video game characters in gaming, and horrible, a crappy game series anyway. I mean, you take the Metroid Prime games, terrible games, man. 3D? Nobody wants to play Metroid in 3D. You gotta be a complete pathetic noob if you like these games. Just garbage. If you want a good first-person shooter, everybody knows you gotta play Call of Duty Modern Warfare 4, coming out next year, 2013. Way better, man. Play any games in the Call of Duty series. Much, much better than Metroid. Alright, number 9. The Smash Brothers series. Ugh, terrible, terrible fighting game slash brawling action game. The first one came out in 1999 for the N64. Complete fail. Nobody bought it. Basically, they took an idea of putting these mascots together, these Nintendo crappy mascots, and making them fight each other. And it's completely unoriginal because this is basically just a ripoff of the Outfoxies, which was basically a 1995 arcade game by Namco. Again, another Namco game being stolen by Nintendo. If I were Namco, I would sue the living freaking pants off Nintendo and all of its properties and IPs and its money and all of that. I would file massive lawsuits for stealing Namco's ideas throughout like 30 years of gaming history. My goodness. And they're not even that good, you know. They're really crappy games. Doesn't make any sense, you know. What do you... You're pitting like Mario against Kirby, against Solid Snake and Sonic. It doesn't make any sense. There's no storyline. The main villain is a freaking glove. I mean, what is this? Michael Jackson's freaking wardrobe? What's going on here? It makes absolutely no sense, and it's like the gameplay is broken, and it's always repetitive. All the characters play the same. They all have the same gameplay. It's like Luigi plays like Mario, and you got Marth that plays like his counterpart, and he plays like Link, and Link plays like young Link. And then you have Samus that plays like freaking Captain Falcon, and Falcon plays like, you know, Ganondorf. I mean, it's like the same games, the same characters. Terrible. Number 10. The worst, crappiest franchise exclusives for Nintendo. Legend of Zelda series. Oh man, this is easily the crappiest, most lame, worst game exclusives for the Nintendo systems. Now, Zelda sucks. Legend of Zelda was always garbage. Ever since the 80s to the 90s, I mean, you had Link to the Past was terrible, okay? Those games were bad. You know, Zelda 2, Zelda 1, all those games. The worst one out of all of them is Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64. You thought Superman 64 was bad. Ocarina of Time was so crappy that it basically killed Zelda for, like, the next 13 years. You know, it wasn't until like many years later, until like you know, they put out this game called Skyward Sword, that the game started to be at least feel a little bit better. But Ocarina of Time was so garbage because it was completely unoriginal, you know. It was so tedious. You're riding around this freaking horse. You're riding a horse. Nobody wants to ride a horse in this massive world. But you don't do anything. You can't do anything. All this game did was rip off Grand Theft Auto. That's right. GTA. And I'm not talking about GTA 3, which they ripped off as well. But the first GTA games, the 2D, top-down point of view, Zelda ripped off. The whole exploration and massive worlds and, you know, walking around this large world, talking to people, you know, going inside people's houses and large cities and towns and stuff like that. Horrible, horrible ripoff of Grand Theft Auto. But the crappy part too is that, I mean, it's you know, it's like for kids basically. They really dumbed it down. You know, it's not violent at all. It's completely toned down. It's cartoony. It's unrealistic. I mean, I could go on and on and on when it comes to this crappy series. Zelda sucks. The main character sucks. His name is Link or something like that. I think his name is Link. His bad gameplay. It looks like a, you know, messed up elf. I mean, what's the deal with this guy? Like, he's got a green hat. What is he? Did he get lost from like the North Pole? You know, am I mistaken here? Is Santa Claus up in the North Pole? Like, hey, what happened to one of my elves? You know, like, what happened to that stupid, you know, dumb-looking elf that I used to boss around? You know, I used to make clean, wash my socks and clean my shoes. You know. Anyway, terrible game series. What else is there to say? I mean, bad villains, bad storyline. It's always about Zelda, but you're not playing Zelda. You're playing Link. But you're playing this character that has a sword, but you have to save Zelda. That's the main name of the series, and then you're riding around a horse in the middle of nowhere, and then you're an elf, but you have magic powers, and then there's all these different games and timelines that doesn't make any sense. This game is so convoluted in its storyline. Let me tell you something. I have been playing video games since early 2011. That's right. I've been playing games for that long. So I know more than you. I am almost 13 years old. I am a game expert. I've been playing games for so long, and so obviously I know what I'm talking about. Don't play Legend of Zelda. It sucks. If you want a good game, you know, I've already said it, Call of Duty, way better than all these games combined. It's not even close. So that's pretty much it. I mean, these are the worst Nintendo exclusives. So that's it for this episode of Fanboy Reviews. And until next time, keep fanboying. Yeah!